I saw what I saw!
I saw what I saw, but no one believes me.
For many, a thing like magic may seem beyond one's reach. The moment's mysterious, fragile, and fleeting, yet so unforgettable. And so we may find ourselves yearning for it, craving to better understand, control, and hold on to it. Perhaps hoping we can make magic a thing we can own. But imagine seeking to find magic and discovering what you believe is the address to its front door. What happens when you give others that information? This is Joseph Matheny's story. Welcome to Information Golem.
My earliest memory, I remember I was crawling and I remember I was wearing a diaper. I remember falling off the edge of the staircase. And as I was falling, I saw my great-grandparents at the bottom of the stairs. And then I hit my head. Years later, my dad showed me a tin plate picture of my great-grandparents. Those were the people that were waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. I'm an only child, but I grew up with 11 cousins. I lived in a multi-generational house in Chicago. A 4-story house. Every level had a mix of generations. My grandmother lived with us. My grandfather was usually on the road. He owned a 3-ring circus. In the wintertime, like towards Thanksgiving and Christmas, he would show up and he would be home for the holidays, and then we wouldn't see him again. A couple of times he took me to Vegas with him at Circus. I know it's a casino, but it's also a circus indoors. For a kid, it was amazing. I would say mostly we got along. There was a couple of black sheep in the sense that they didn't go along with the norm. So I had an aunt who was a beatnik and a painter. And my Uncle Chuck, he ended up becoming like a big deal computer programmer in Silicon Valley. And my grandfather really was. He was something else, man. I mean, he was an occultist, he was an anarchist, and he was a polyamorist. They ended up being kind of role models for me and turning me on to literature. You know, like, oh, read this. This is Jack Kerouac. Read that. You'll like that. The work of Jack Parsons. We weren't religious or anything like that, but it was definitely the morals of the household until you got older and figured out otherwise were basically 50s Atomic Family morals, you know. And then when you got to be like 14 or 15 and you started to figure things out, you're like, wait a minute. So grandpa sleeps with Aunt Grace when he's not at home. Oh, I put this together.
So a lot of it's about your extended family, but not much about your parents.
I didn't relate to them, even at a young age. I wanted to do other things, and I had other interests that frankly scared the shit out of them, I think. I used to read at like 3 grades above whatever my grade level was and hold conversations with adults. I tended to hang out with kids that were older than me, even when I was running the streets. So, you know. Well, they were very middle class. My dad liked to go to Wisconsin and go hunting and fishing, and I'd go with him because I like those things. We didn't talk much, but we bonded by doing things together. My dad was not a big talker. My mom and I didn't have a lot in common, really. My dad was a union factory worker, usually worked at like steel mills and auto manufacturing plants, drove a bread truck for a while. You know, they were good people. It wasn't like they were bad people, but we just didn't see eye to eye on morality. I actually, back then especially, idolized my grandfather and his lifestyle, and my mom just was not down with the program. A lot of her behavior was in a reaction to what she considered improper behavior by my grandfather, even though what he was doing with knowledge and consent of my grandmother. Really had a grudge. My parents, they didn't want me to become like him because they thought he was a bad person. I actually idolized my grandfather in his lifestyle. So there was a lot of other parental figures that were taking care of me. Parenting was more like zone coverage in basketball than it was than it was like a one-on-one relationship. All the adults were your parents. I think of my childhood as a continuum, and it was pretty much all good. I want to say the 6th grade, I had a friend, Chuck, who convinced me that we should go get our ham radio license. And I said, okay, let's do it.
I'm Matt Futterman, WB6KPN.
My name is Enrique. Enrique, well, the same as Henry.
Everyone you've seen so far is a friend of mine. I haven't met them in person, but we all have something in common. Ham radio.
I got some really crappy equipment from a garage sale, kludged everything together, and I had like a mobile antenna sticking out my bedroom window. And one Christmas I got an actual base station, put an antenna up on the roof. It was on a desk in my bedroom. I sit down, I turn on the base station, which is tube type. You would hear it hum. You would see the lights come on in the tube, and you would turn on the mic. And then I would call out the call letters, and say that I was on the air. Say, hey, what's up, man? And they would talk back to me, and then we would go into a chat. And if that didn't happen, then I would usually go into broadcast mode, and I would pick something to read, or I would pick some music to play. I had my own radio station. What kid wouldn't like that, right? By the time I was in the 7th grade, I had a license and a call letters, and I was broadcasting around the world. I had an interest in rock and roll criticism. I followed people like Rolling Stone writers and Legs McNeil and Lester Bangs. Originally, when I started talking to some of these people, they were like, "Are you a kid? You have a good signal, man. What are you running?" And I would tell them, and then I would tell them how I modified it.
Oh, you modded it? My God. And you have your license? You're not just on here illegally.
I had people in my group that were, straight up hillbillies in Tennessee, and people in South America, and people in Japan, and military people all over the world. There was one guy called himself the Pale Rider. He was very mysterious, and he had echo on his voice. And
everybody, this is the Pale Rider.
I used to fall asleep listening to this crazy shit on my bedside table, listening to this, people ranting on about, you name it, the Illuminati, I've got the proof, that the lizards are running the world, and the militia movement was on there, whatever. I'm 12 years old. It's the 70s, and I'm walking down the street and I see a garage sale. It's summertime. I have about $1 in my pocket, and so I go into the garage sale, and there's a table full of paperback books. There was a book that I thought was an astrology book, and I bought it. And I went home and I started reading it. It was Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, and I went, oh my God, what is this? The discovery of women. I would say things like, well, Miller says intelligence is skewed upon the masses. So to say things like that at that dinner table, which are a bunch of middle-class stoic French people.
Could it also be oh no, here we go again?
Yes. I was just a weirdo, which was a legitimate place in my family. Every generation had a weirdo.
Weirdo, pronounced weirdo. Noun informal, a person whose dress or behavior seems strange or eccentric. The streets are dangerous and there are too many weirdos around. Synonyms: eccentric, oddity, unorthodox person, individualist, individual, nonconformist, free spirit, bohemian, maverick, deviant, pervert, misfit, dropout.
There was a conversation that happened between my grandmother and my mom, and then right after that, I was allowed to go visit my grandfather. No questions asked. My family got bigger, basically. I mean, these people are really, really outsiders, to the person. I mean, these are people from all over the world, all cultural walks of life, people with physical deformities, physical differences. And everybody's accepting of everybody, and they don't care that you're black or you're brown or you're yellow. Any of these things don't matter. It was like somebody had taken an oath, and like, I swear to defend my brothers and sisters in the circus despite all odds. It's these people versus the world from their perspective. And in a lot of ways, it was them versus the world. They had built their own alternate reality over here in the circus where they could survive and they could do what they wanted to do and be happy and thrive. People were just amazing. Like, the stuff they knew. I saw the clowns without their makeup. I saw the people who trained the stallions, sitting around smoking cigarettes and talking just day-to-day talk. That really inspired me. And because I was who I was, because I was Charlie's grandson, they took me right in. A new member of the crew appeared, 20 years old, and somehow still in high school. So he was actually an intelligent guy. He just really had a problem with authority. Somehow I had managed to not get involved with drugs. So we talked about getting high. He said, oh yeah, I got high before. Well, can you get us some pot? Well, I don't know about. So I think I told you that I had an aunt who was an artist, who was a bohemian. Me and my friends wanted to get some pot. And she's like, oh, cool. You guys are going to get high? I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, okay, I get this friend. Yeah. So anyway, we pile in Johnny's car and we drive out to the suburbs, and we find a place behind a park. We start smoking this pot. And then all of a sudden, felt like my head had been hit by static electricity. I literally heard the crack. And I was looked at everybody like, holy shit. It made me realize that what I didn't want to do is stay in Chicago and get a factory job.
So what changes then?
Drugs, music, and women, yes. I got in a 1969 Ford Fairlane given to me by my father at 16 and packed it with my buddies, and we drove to Tulsa, Oklahoma to see the Sex Pistols in Kane's Ballroom. It's like a 12-hour one-way trip, but we all had to lie to our parents. To see them, we were surrounded by cowboys in the mosh pit. These guys with big buckles and big hats, chewing tobacco and kind of looking at us what the hell they doing? You're this is frustration, this is anger, this is discontent. I had started to feel that, here's a place where we can scream about the inequalities, inequities, and the unfairness and the idiocy of the world together.
I think you're trying to shock people.
I don't give a shit what you think. I know what I think, and that's all that counts to me.
So I've always been an expressive, emotional person.
Did that happen in your family? I didn't really hear that.
No. I mean, one or two members of my family for sure I did, but they were the black sheep.
If you showed them who you are.
Yeah, then I lose them.
Is Chicago nurturing you at that time?
Oh, yeah. Early 20-something. So I had my hair gelled up into a mohawk and manic panic streaked in it. I met these two guys, Larry and Irving.
Hi.
Larry used to own a bookstore in Evanston, and his friend Irving was a poet. There was a hardware store downtown Evanston where Northwestern is. above the hardware store were these old apartments. And because it was on the weekends, they could throw raging parties at night. These parties were epic. Del Close, the guy who trained all the Second City actors in improv, so he would show up, and then he would bring the Second City people, like, and me, you know, like, oh my God, was that John Belushi? You know, it's like, it was amazing. And the drugs, sound systems, and conversations I would get into. You know, I'm sitting there smoking a joint with like one of William Burroughs' friends, and I'm just like, you don't know Bill Burroughs.
Oh yeah, Barry, come over here and tell this punk that I know Bill Burroughs.
But, you know, at that age, you wonder if you could hold your own. And I found out that I could. I wasn't dismissed as a kid. Yeah, there was a guy named Mickey. I dated his daughter for a while, and he was an old jazz head. He was a pharmacist. So Mickey was living in the compound of the hardware store. They called it the swamp, you know, after MASH. Basically, he just hired me. And because of him, I ended up getting a pharmacy technician's license so I could assist him. As it turned out, I was good at it, so we got along really well. And so he was a mentor to me. You know, like, I was doing drugs and like listening to Miles Davis and John Coltrane. We used to sit around and read the PDR. I'd be like, hey, look at this. This is Belgo space tabs. It actually has hydrogen in it. And this is like a derivative of ergot fungus. And I read that this is actually Albert Hoffman that derived this, the guy who created LSD-25. What if we took a bunch of these? What do you think would happen? You would order them. The doctor who worked there was an addict. He was addicted to opioids, and he didn't care that we knew. And he looked and sounded like William S. Burroughs. And so I used to call him Dr. Benway. And then he would croak at me, why are you always calling me that? You know, it's like, we had this guy running the clinic, a pain clinic. And so we'd all be just high as a fucking kite. In the morning, we would come in and we would dissolve like 4 Tylenol 4s in distilled water and then pour it through a strainer so we got all the acetaminophen out of it. And then we would take that water and we would make coffee, really strong coffee. And I'm running the front desk, and then the first call would come through on the intercom. And that was like him saying for me to bring him a cup of coffee. He called me Juan Valdez. And so I've got a room full of junkies. And then I've got these 2 crazy people behind me who are just high as, and I'm high as a kite. The whole situation was just chaos, right? It was a unique thing. This was like 1986. And so we had to use computers for the pharmacy system. We were running these DOS programs, and because I knew electronics, Mickey, the pharmacist, was, you know, like,
You think you could figure out how we could modify this so we could do the things we need to do?
All of a sudden, now I'm getting immersed in computer programming. So this is when it really started to happen. I discovered Robert Anton Wilson, Terrence McKenna, Nick Herbert, Philip K. Dick, Azine, Reality Hack, Timothy Leary. This computer thing is going to be huge. It's going to change the world. It's going to give us a new frontier, a new community space, blah, blah, blah. Revivals, the Church of the Subgenius, that stuff like rang my bell. Oh, yeah. I was in bands, women, drugs. I was very involved in the music underground, Front 242, Ministry, the house scene, Frankie Knuckles, acid music. So you would take like Coltrane's Love Supreme and you would just like poof, drop it onto the groove. Rave. I was an adrenaline junkie. I was go, 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 go. I even had a radio show at the college station. Psychedelics and music. So I was in my apartment in Chicago. I had this friend from California who came back from California with Grateful Dead acid. I did like 2 doses of it. And I'm with my girlfriend at the time who had never done acid before. And ooh, was I high. Really, really high. She's just like gripping a column in my loft, you know, like looking at me like, what have you done to me? And I'm like,
Brace with me. We'll get through this.
I'm like, we can do this.
Oh my god.
And then I'm sitting there and I look up on my desk. There is, like, back then computers were like, you know, like the tower and the monitor was like 8 feet deep, and looking at the modem. And I'm thinking, it's right here. I've got it all right here. I have a phone system, so I can hack the phone system. I've got access to a copy machine. I can print anything I want as much as I want. Bulletin board system. I have a radio over there. If I wanted to broadcast, I could. I'm in a band. We can do audio cassette tapes. It hit me. Like, everything you've been doing to this point has led to this point. Do something with it. And that's when the seeds of Ong's Hat were born. In Chicago, brilliant avant-garde artists, but just weren't understanding what I was trying to say because they weren't conversant in the technology side. So they were like, that's where they would flatline on me. I was thinking about things like creating messaging that subverts the predominant paradigm. I didn't want to frighten anybody either. And, you know, it's like, because I knew that some of my relatives were terrified of the things that I was living and doing. When 2020 had the special of punk rock and new wave, I think it was 78 or 79, I watched it with them.
An extreme element of new wave is what is called punk.
I was like sitting, getting off on this, you know, and I'm looking at them and they were just terrified. And they were just like, oh my God, can you imagine if those people were here? Thank God they're in England. You know? Like, you know, it's like I did not want to have the conversation. They didn't understand, and I didn't understand why they didn't understand. And rather than get into a debacle every time I wanted to go somewhere and look a certain way, I closeted it to where they didn't know what I was doing. And I actually had, you know, t-shirt and blue jeans and tennis shoes when I left my house, you know, and then I had the other stuff. I would change clothes. Probably when I was like 13 or 14, the Lampins next door were over, and I was part of the conversation, right? Interacting in the conversation. And I kept saying, I think I want to move to California when I get older. And people were like, well, why do you want to do that? And you know, it's like, well, there's more people like me. And I just kept saying more people like me. And then my dad, he looks over at the other people, you know, who are not the family people, who are looking kind of like trying to figure out what I'm talking about. And he puts his hand like this and he goes, artists. And then I saw them all go, oh, you know, it's like. I go to college, I come back, and I go to visit the family house. I'm like catching up with the family. My grandmother's, you know, doing her thing, drinking her tea, and I'm telling them, like, you know, I think I'm going to move to California. My aunt looks at me and she goes,
So you still dress weird and listen to weird music and read weird books, huh?
So what? Now you're sure about California?
Yeah. Later, not too long after that, I was walking down the street, and all of a sudden, I saw. Do you remember those sculptures from the 70s that had fishing line on them, and there was oil that would drip down the fishing line, and it would be illuminated? The walls took on that aspect, but the drops of oil were Hebrew letters dropping down these vines that were hanging on all the walls, and it just happened for like a few seconds, and then I was back, you know, in the world, and then I was like, uh-oh. I'm like, what the hell was that? Not that long after, I was still in Chicago. In the mail, I got a copy of Gnosis magazine, and on the cover was a painting by Alex Gray, and it looked like that. And I went, oh, shit, somebody else sees that too? I felt like I had to be in the San Francisco Bay Area ASAP because something was about to happen. I loaded the cat in the car up and the girlfriend.